Well, hey, everybody, and I'm here for a courageous conversation with someone that we went, wow, whoa, oh, when we saw some of the stuff she was doing. I mean, it was super exciting and heard about it, and we sort of knew, and we met her, but then it was like, she knocked our socks off. So, yeah. And so, Christy, tell us about you.
Well, I'll tell you that I did not start out being a dementia expert, but I have, in a way, through a long journey, I have somewhat become one. I started out as a journalist and a daughter who had a really close relationship with her father and just didn't want him to stop hanging out with me. So I used my curiosity and my skills really to find you and research a lot of stuff to help live a dignified and daily life with dementia. So I've kind of become a combination of those things and now a resource to others who are going through the same journey.
Boy, have you ever. But now, so this journalist got curious about something you were experiencing in real life, but what were you doing journalist wise before all that started? Because you had this curiosity and this drive and this intensity and the ability to put a story together. But what were you doing before this became what you started doing? Because this is now a full-time job.
It is. It is. I mean, journalism is my day-to-day job, and I was doing the local news, whatever was relevant for the day.
Yeah, things that were interesting, things that were different, things that had happened. So you were used to covering that. What got you to turn around and look at what was happening to you and realize, oh, there's the news story that doesn't get told? How did that happen?
Oh gosh, well, I had a front row seat to all of the gaps in care, all of the difficulties, all of the joys and triumphs. I mean, I was a care partner with my father for many years. He had early onset alzheimer's, and we later found out there was some Lewy body in there as well. So it was a mixed dementia. And we experienced so much, just about everything you could, going through different stages of the disease, different challenges, different joys. And when it got to those difficult moments, I mean, it really dumbfounded me because my job is to research, right? It's what I do. And I consider myself pretty educated and able to handle technology and difficult things. And when I found myself struggling to navigate the system and to find coping mechanisms and techniques that worked, I realized that this is a much, much bigger issue that a lot of people are facing. And I had a platform out there to try and bring in some of those resources and bring in some of that help to bring it to a wider audience. So not just my dad could benefit from it, but friends and family and the wider audience could too.
Yeah. So I'm going to point something out folks may not realize is that I'm a lot older than you. And
Not much.
a lot. So classically, when people think about someone who's supporting or caring for somebody who's living with dementia, they often think of people like me, who I'm in my 60s, my late 60s. I could be my early, late, middle, the early 70s. That's not uncommon to be supporting somebody who's living with dementia or to have your own. Yeah, it's a little early for most dementias. I mean, young onset, even at 60 plus, is sort of young. But how old was your dad with first symptoms? Because I'm going to bet, given looking at you, ooh, wow.
He was very young. He was in his mid-50s, first symptoms, and we realized that he knew even years before we did the challenges. And we found evidence of that in emails that he had sent himself, printouts in his briefcase that we later found. I think there was a pride component there, that it took us a couple of years to get on the same page about it. But he was in his early 50s and I was in my mid 20s doing a lot of that. I'm 32 now, and he died when I was 30. So
Wow.
I was in my 20s living my years out of order in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were on a ski slope. And I mean, the other thing is how rapidly the dementia took over and ruined, in many ways, the relationship you used to have and gave you an opportunity for a new relationship. But the one you had previously and the way he engaged in the world previously wasn't what he was able to do. And so, really creating that new landscape and that new relationship, it took your dad a while to do that. How would you say, how hard was it for you and other maybe family members to let go of what was, to be able to be with him where he was and as it was, and in a very broken system in many ways? I mean, really broken for somebody who's a young onset. I mean, talk about broken, super.
It's such a good question, and it's such a complicated and layered one to answer because you are remembering someone that you knew, interacting with someone who very much looks the same. You're also grieving the loss of the person that you knew while they're still sitting right there in front of you. Some days have some of those skills, some days they don't. You're always off balance. Most of the time you're in crisis mode, just trying to figure out what's right in front of you, not able to process some of the losses that you've experienced. So that kind of comes later and it piles up. So it becomes very important and to live in the moment and to be there in the moment with them and preserve that precious time that you've got, because it does end up piling up, realizing when you start to look back, it's kind of like when you're with someone day to day, you don't realize the scope of the changes until you really start to look back and get a little perspective. And in this case, it's very much a process. It's a constant process because this disease is always changing and their skills and abilities are always changing. And your emotions are always changing. Some days you're able to handle it better emotionally. Some days it's really upsetting. I remember the first time he didn't remember seeing me that day, and that one hit me really hard. But then later on down the line, those moments didn't matter as much as the moments when I would walk in the room and his eyes would light up. And for that moment, he may not know my name, he was excited to see me and he felt safe and comfortable and loved around me. Yeah. And that's what mattered more. And so that was a process for me getting through those emotional barricades.
Yeah. So I think what's also tricky, and I'm really interested in, is you had two dementias on board at the same time. You had early onset Alzheimer's, or young onset. We call it young onset because it's more accurate than early. It's young. And then you had Lewy body. And they're two very unique and very different dementias. How did you figure out what was going on and what to do about what was going on? Because particularly he's so young. And a lot of those symptoms will be written off as other things way often. But how did you being a journalist, how did you dig through all that and figure all that out?
That was, I'll be honest, it was not easy. And there weren't a lot of people leading us in the right direction either. It was a journey of kind of self-discovery too. Really knowing your loved one is the first most important thing.
Piece number one of the puzzle. You've got to know the person.
Got to know the person, and whoever you bring in to help, maybe assist in caring, that is the number one thing, making sure that they really know your loved one too. Because
they're a good match. They've got to be a good match, because if you don't bring in a good match, you end up with lots of conflict, and that just adds fuel to the fire. So yeah, knowing your loved one and then figuring out how does this person fit in and are they going to be a good matchup?
Yes. And then you also know what's normal for them and what's not. So you can figure out maybe where some of those changes are. And when we started, no one ever gave us a diagnosis of Lewy body. We didn't figure that out until that was a posthumous discovery. And from
wow. Oh, sorry, my jaw just went down. It was like, oh, so it wasn't until after he passed, after he died, that when you put they did the autopsy.
Which we had to push really,
You
really.
had to push really hard for because, well, it's dementia. What does it matter? It's like, I'm related to him, and I would really like to know some. Well, it's probably not safe to. I mean, but he had Alzheimer's. What do you need to know? And it's like, I need to know. I'm a journalist. I want to know, was that accurate, inaccurate? Because there were a lot of things that went on that didn't actually make a lot of sense.
Yes,
I think
we suspected it. My mom and I were, the primary, at least family caregivers. And we had one other person who became like a sister and a daughter that helped us out. And we had our own suspicions because of some pretty intense hallucinations, some of the tremors, some of the leaning, and, just some of the symptoms that made us think.
Sleep problems.
Some sleep problems. Yes. So we suspected it, but we didn't get confirmation, and no one else really noticed it like we did, at least enough to give us a diagnosis while he was alive. So that was something we dealt with kind of on our own and tried to not so much treat, but just trying to understand how to support.
So, I have I'm not a journalist, but I have a curiosity bug, and so I'm really curious, as you look back on it, did he have any really strong reactions to medications that, looking forward, if you had known that there was Lewy body, you might have been more like, hang on there. He might have Lewy body. So I'm wondering whether that's a good medication at that dosage to try, or was that not an issue for him?
Tipa, this is good. I mean, you hit the nail on the head here. This is the moment that was a huge turning point for my family. He was prescribed by a neurologist that we have been seeing, an antipsychotic that we had started getting into some, challenging situations. And my mom was at home, and there were times where she didn't feel safe. And so we were looking for some help. We had reached the point where we had done everything we could do, and we needed some support. But so we trusted that this was an option to try, and it backfired in a big way. He had a very strong reaction. And looking back in hindsight, it's so much easier to see that that is what caused it. In the moment, you're not 100% sure what it is. But there was a moment where his behavior escalated over the course of about 5 days until it reached a tipping point. And he actually went after my mom. And neighbors had to call the cops.
911 and
911 came, and it led
voluntary commitment and
exactly, which is the worst thing, I believe, now for him, and created a lot of trauma that could have been avoided.
Yeah, and from then on, your mom would have PTSD.
Yes.
No way she couldn't have. That's a reality. And that happened. And I just want to be real super clear. This is me saying this is not you saying it. That lack of awareness and knowledge and curiosity on the part of providers who should be really super invested in being really thoughtful and careful about the possible of a mixed dementia, or when you give me some symptoms, being super cautious about things that have black box warnings, and still thinking, well, that's what we'll try, before really exploring what are some other possibilities we could try that might have less challenge associated, finding out maybe history. How's your dad been with meds in the past? Has he ever had like hyperreactivity or never took a bunch of meds? Tell me about it.
Yeah. Those are the questions they really should be asking that we didn't get a whole lot of. He had a sensitive system. So we knew that he would react strongly or negatively to certain things. They looked, of course, at his medical chart. They could see if he'd had a stent or blood thinners, and that's what they seemed to care about in my experience. But we didn't get a whole lot of the interpersonal questions, a lot of the questions about who is he, how does he react to this? And to be honest with you, when we noticed the escalation, we tried to reach out and we went back to the same office and got no help. And it was a very helpless feeling to be.
Either try this or nothing. I mean, this is what I have to offer you. And I think in cases like yours, I mean, and then as you look back, it's like that was a turning point. That was a huge turning point in his life and your lives. And I mean, your curiosity continued, but the situation got really, really negative in so many ways. And the reality is it could be different, but it has to be different by people being more tuned in and more interested and actually excited with curiosity about this really complicated condition and not writing it off, well, you know, this is the only thing I have to offer you. It's like there's ways to do this that are real different. And it's just frustrating to know that that's been the case for years now. And yet we still have the little go-to phenomena of here's what I can offer you, instead of, let's explore this a little bit more and make sure we've checked out every possibility. And here's how we're going to offer this. It's going to be like super low and we're going to go super slow because he is so, I mean, I sit here now and say that, but what I think you and your family experienced is we need to be saying that more ahead of time, not waiting until we get to a crisis when everybody's going, we have to do something. And we do, but doing that something could be more broadly based, maybe.
Absolutely. And, we realized that it really became our job to know. It became our personal job to research, to know, to ask the right questions, to be his advocate, to be skeptical, to be extra curious. But it is really hard to do that when you're in a moment of crisis, and you're in those moments a lot. And so it's a lot to ask of people. And a lot of the time when you're trying to help people dress or help people do several activities of daily living, you don't have time.
My brain will only hold so much, and I'm focused on this. I mean, in the moment, and thinking beyond that, I can't do it. It's like, well, that's what an advisor, somebody who's keeping track of stuff, would be able to do. But in the moment, you're trying to find your feet and make it through the moment and try to figure out, what did I do differently this time? Or why is he reacting differently this time? I thought I did the same thing.
Ideally, it should be a partnership and something that could be, preventative, something that you could come to a conclusion maybe ahead of time, be extra curious together. And if something doesn't work, then, okay, you pivot together. Ideally, that's how it should go. But I found in our case, it didn't go that way most of the time.
So I'm wondering, did anybody from like a provider, like a medical provider or any other provider, say, hey, Christie, could you do me a big favor? Could you video from a little distance the interactions you're experiencing so we can get a handle on what might be going on there and take a look at everything?
Oh gosh, I wish someone had asked me that question. I'm great with video. We have videos on our cell phones. Everybody has the option. It's so easy. And then it is also more descriptive than you try to replay the scenario over and over again, especially when maybe you're also in the room with your loved one. You don't want to, say things that you feel like could hurt their feelings, or you never know what they might hold on to or what emotion they might hold on to if they hear something and it upsets them. So I wish someone had asked us that.
I know when you do TV news, often I'm betting they have what's called B-roll, or they have like you're on the scene, but you also shot some stuff so that when you're talking, it's not just you standing there talking. Is that true?
100%. That is a key piece of doing the news, is having the video to go with it.
And so we can do it on news channels, but we can't figure out how to do it in healthcare for very complex situations. Yeah, I mean, it just makes me curious. So I'm going to pause the conversation here, but what I'm going to ask you is, so you went through this with your dad, but now you're on a new platform. Hi, I'm Tifa Snow. and you just found our YouTube channel and watched one of our videos. I'm the owner and founder of Positive Approach to Care. Thanks for watching. And if you liked, if you have a comment about, or you would, please share it with people you know. Oh, and if you haven't yet done it, consider subscribing. We'll let you know when the next new video comes out. And you might want to visit our website, www.tipasnow.com, where you'll find other resources as well. See you there.